So for me, this actually became a real problem. And I was just feeling like, this just doesn't look as good as it should. This just doesn't look as sharp as it should. I genuinely wished I'd taken earplugs. I really wonder why these things are not being talked about more. If you're a filmmaker or have any interest in filmmaking, then there's a very high chance that over the last couple of months, you've been obsessing over and deep diving into the making of The Odyssey. The Odyssey is Christopher Nolan's latest film. The approach to it from a technical point of view has been very Nolan-esque, but turned up to a whole different level. They've shot the entire film on IMAX film, 70mm, the first time that's ever been done. I went and watched this film last night in IMAX. It is spectacular. It's an absolute cinematic masterpiece visually. You constantly are watching it thinking, how on earth did they do that? But I had a couple of real issues with the film, and it wasn't necessarily to do with the acting or the script. The issues I had were really with the viewing experience and considering the amount of money, the amount of work, the amount of time that has gone into making this the most spectacular cinematic experience that it could possibly be. I really wonder why these things are not being talked about more. People talk a lot about sound in Nolan films, you know, from Bane's voice in The Dark Knight Rises.
You think darkness is your ally?
To the whole of Tenet, to how loud Oppenheimer was.
It was a weird moment.
The Odyssey definitely has a lot of those issues. The dialogue is often quite muddy and actually sometimes almost impossible to make out. The overall volume, the level of sound is so high that there are points at which I genuinely wished I'd taken earplugs. And I get that you want to make it as immersive as possible. And I also get why Nolan likes dialogue just purely to be recorded, you know, live on set. He wants the real delivery from the actors, and I really get that. But actually, when you can't quite hear what they're saying, you're losing something.
What a lovely, lovely voice.
The other thing that I've heard talked about a lot is focus, things being out of focus. There are scenes when people's faces, key elements within the frame are noticeably out of focus, sometimes just for a split second, sometimes for a few seconds at a time. There's a particular scene between Penelope, which is Anne Hathaway's character, and Telemachus, Tom Holland's character, which is quite an intense emotional scene, and she is moving in and out of focus. Sometimes the focus goes with her, sometimes it doesn't. The core issue is depth of field. So depth of field is the range of distance from the camera that is in focus at any given time. The key factors in depth of field are the size of the frame. So in film, that's purely the size of the frame of the film stock. In digital, that's the size of the sensor. And then the aperture. So how wide the aperture is. So the wider the aperture is, the shallower the depth of field. So the smaller range of distance that is in focus at any given time. Now, obviously this was shot on the biggest format that it can be shot on, 70mm IMAX film. And what that means for the cameras that they were using is that an aperture value of T4 would be the equivalent of roughly T1.8 in a standard 35mm frame or sensor size. So that means that at T4, their depth of field is incredibly shallow. And so for those kinds of scenes, keeping track of focus is really tough. Now, there are scenes in which that is totally fine and it's an effect that works. Scenes when they're at sea, there's a lot going on, there's action, you want that chaotic feel that you're not quite got a handle on everything that's going on. But in those intense kind of dialogue, people-focused scenes, for me, it really loses something. You might ask the question, okay, why didn't they stop it down? Why didn't they shoot at T6 or T7 or something like that? Yeah, I mean, I wonder, I guess Christopher Nolan doesn't like using tons of lighting where he's able to use practical and available light. He likes to do that, so obviously if you go for a higher aperture value, you need more light. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know. So the audio and the focus are the two things that I've heard a lot of conversation about. But actually the thing that bothered me the most, which is something that I haven't heard talked about a lot, is judder. Judder is one of those things that you'll probably be aware of, but may not even realize that you've thought about. Judder is generally most notable either on panning shots or on shots where a large portion of what is filling the frame is moving from one side to another. And what it is that kind of staccato effect. So you get this perception of things within the frame sort of having a stuttery movement. Now it's important to say that a certain amount of this judder is something that we have come to expect. We've been conditioned to expect when we watch films. And actually when you remove it altogether through a process called motion smoothing, it really impacts how you see the film.
Motion smoothing is a digital effect on most high-definition televisions and is intended to reduce motion blur in sporting events and other high-definition programming.
The unfortunate side effect is that it makes most movies look like they were shot on high-speed video rather than film. Now, this is sometimes referred to as the soap opera effect.
It was an issue that came up with The Hobbit, where Peter Jackson wanted it all shot in 48 frames per second instead of 24, just to get that much smoother movement, to lose the judder. But then people's perspective on that was, actually, this looks weird now. This looks like a soap opera. There is a certain amount of that, which is fine, certain amount of that which we expect when we're watching films. But in the Odyssey, it was so noticeable. There were points at which I found it incredibly distracting, and it really took me out of the experience of watching the film. So what causes judder? Technically, what you're seeing when you're watching a film or watching a video is an impression of movement rather than actual movement. For standard TV and video in the UK, where I am, it's 25 frames per second. So for every second you watch, you are seeing 25 still frames played in order at speed to create the effect of movement. In film, the standard is 24 frames per second. But your brain moves much faster than that. So your brain is able to identify that the position of an object in the frame should have moved slightly more than it does from one frame to the next. So it sees it jumping in position. And that is what creates the stutter effect. So is this an issue that's specific to the Odyssey? And if so, why? If it's such a technical masterpiece, then why am I being impacted? The reason that Christopher Nolan is so obsessed with the IMAX format is because he loves cinema. He loves the idea of something projected at such a huge scale, how immersive that becomes. But the challenge that that presents is that it gives your brain so much more information to work with. And it means that the challenge of tricking your brain into thinking this is actual motion becomes much, much harder. Because I'm watching an image that's 5 stories high, every little jump between frames, every little judder is so much more noticeable. So for me, this actually became a real problem. I was watching these shots where the camera is panning, or there's a giant ship in frame that is moving across the frame, and I was just feeling like, this just doesn't look as good as it should. This just doesn't look as sharp as it should. So this isn't the first time that I've watched a film in IMAX. Obviously, I've been to a number of IMAX screenings before, and I love the giant screen. I love the immersiveness of it. But this isn't a problem that I've ever noticed as much. And I was wondering why that is. And I think perhaps it's just the fact that the entire film was shot for that IMAX format. Generally, when you go and watch a film, actually, there'll be chunks of this film that don't use the entire screen. It you don't really notice it, but it actually jumps between using the entire screen and then being slightly letterboxed. But for me, it was a real shame. There were these issues, the focus, the sound, the judder, that took me out of the film. It just meant that my experience of watching this incredible cinematic spectacle, which so much artistry and craft and hard work and money had gone into making, just was impacted. I didn't enjoy it as much as I might otherwise have because of these issues. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go and watch it in IMAX, because not everyone will experience it in the same way as I did. And I actually haven't heard many people talking about the judder issue, so maybe that was just me. But if I were to go and watch it again, I wouldn't watch it in IMAX. I would watch it in a smaller format because I feel like those things would bother me less. What I'd love to know is whether anyone else had the same issues as me, or whether this was just me. I'd love to know whether other people were bothered by that judder. As I say, I've heard people talk about the sound, talk about the focus, but not really talk about the judder. And that was the biggest thing for me. So did other people notice it? And the other thing that I would say is that these are the ultimate filmmaking experts at the absolute top of their game. I'm just a guy in Leeds in the UK who makes videos for businesses. I am not the expert, and so all I can talk about is my experience of watching the film and how that was impacted. I'm not wanting to create any kind of pylon and say, hey everyone, what Christopher Nolan and Hoyt van Hoytema have done is rubbish, because obviously that isn't the case. And I also would not say to anyone, don't go and see it. I would say absolutely go and see it. It's a phenomenal spectacle. I'm just saying that these are things that impacted my appreciation and experience of watching it. There's a tennis ball in here with a little face on it. Oh, hey. Feel free to pile on, to tell me I'm an idiot. I've got no idea what I'm talking about. I'd really like to hear other people's thoughts on this. Also, please subscribe to our channel. Essentially, we are people who love filmmaking. We do it in our way. We try and share what we're doing, and we try and share our thoughts on filmmaking, on films, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff. So subscribe. We'll do other stuff. It's totally different to this, but it's all based around a love of filmmaking, of the filmmaking process, and I think you'll enjoy it. Bye.
You might be wondering, why is this guy talking into a jug? That's a fair question.